Welcome, friends. It is good to have you here. We're doing things a little bit differently. Normally, I don't go live on a Monday afternoon, closer to the afternoon, anyways. But I'm excited to get this stuff rolling. And so, welcome. It's good to have you here. I hope you, as always, grab something good to drink because I always feel like studying the Word of God is better with something to drink in your hands. So let's dive in. By the way, if you're new here, welcome. We are working through 20 rebuttals to some claims that have been made on a 38-minute video by ADL. In fact, if you want to watch the video, it's actually in the description of this particular video and all of the previous ones. This is episode number 4. Where we're going to be dealing with kind of what's called the method of destruction that gets brought up by Jason on ADL. So it is good to have you here. By the way, scan the code. Many of you already are a part of our Discord channel. We would love to have you join. Great conversation about all different kinds of things. And so it is so nice to have a community, a robust community that likes to just wrestle with the text together. So we'd love to have you scan the code and join the Discord channel. By the way, some of you have partnered with us on Patreon. I do want to mention that if you love what we're doing and you want to partner with us, it's all in the code. It's all in the QR code. So scan the code and definitely would love to have you partner with us. I've got a stack of books behind me. And you know what? I can't show you all the new ones, but I do have to show you this. This is pretty cool. Okay. This is a side note. This is an extra. I wasn't planning on doing this. My wife is awesome. She got me a really cool book that at first glance might defend something that you might think is, well, I'll just let you determine. This book right here, it's called The Sabbath for Man. And it's written by a gentleman by the name of Crafts. Check this out. This particular book, pretty cool. My wife found it on an old bunch of books. It's written, copyright 1894. I'm going to show you this real quick. 1894. I know that today's discussion is not on the Sabbath, but at first glance, this says Sabbath for Man, a study on the origin, obligation, history, advantages, and present state of Sabbath observance. Now, you might at first glance, since this is back in the late 1800s, think that, hey, this is a Sabbatarian argument. It is, but it's not what you think, actually. So anyways, I just wanted to share. I'm a man of always getting books. And so with that, we're going to get started. Just wanted to give you a quick kind of insight into some of the things that I've got going on the stack. It's about a 2-foot stack of books that I'm actively working through right now among the 30-some thousand that I certainly won't be able to get through on Logos. All right, that's enough of me jumping in. Let's actually watch the video. Now I'm going to set this up. Okay. I was trying to clip this into a little bit of a shorter segment. I did not feel like clipping it into a shorter amount would do it justice because you need to get the whole context of the claim. Okay. So this is going to be a longer video. It's about 4 minutes long. It's going to take the entire kind of claim, and then we're going to work through the text and see if the claim holds up against the text itself. So with that, let's dig in, and here's the video clip.
To our King James Version, and let's go back to Daniel chapter 8. Here we go. Daniel chapter 8. Notice something in Daniel chapter 8. How does this king get destroyed? Let's look at the prophecy. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken how, friends? How is this king going to be broken?
Without hand.
Without hand. Who does the Bible says is broken without hand?
Rome.
Let's look at it. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 2. We're going to read this thing about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. If you don't know, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. It was a statue, and it represented these 4 great kingdoms. Daniel interprets the dream. We're going to pick it up from verse 34. Actually, I'll read the whole thing. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and of clay. Thou sawest till that stone was cut out without hands. What? Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands?
Come on.
Which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them in pieces?
Come on.
Who is this talking about? The 4th kingdom is the one that is broken without hands, friends. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer, threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found of them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the earth. And he goes on later to interpret this dream from verses 36 on. It says, this is the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation. Thou, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given you a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven have given into your hand, and hath made thee ruler over all of them. Then he says plainly, thou are this head of gold. What he's saying, friends, is the first king is Babylon. And after Babylon shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another 3rd kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And here it is, the 4th kingdom, friends.
Yep.
That's the one that is broken without hands. The 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, and as so much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet of toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with merry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so shall the kingdom be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with merry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron does not mix with clay. And here it is, friends. And in the days of these kings, that 4th kingdom, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. It's going to break in pieces. For as much as thou saw the stone that was cut out of the mountain, how, friends? How?
Without hands.
Without hands, friends. You get
Come
the
on.
point. The kingdom that is destroyed without hands is the 4th kingdom upon the earth. That is Rome. That is not Greece.
All right. Sorry, I was enjoying the show. Okay. Now, I always like to make sure that as I start a couple of things. First of all, this is true with anything. This is true with my show. This is true with anyone's show. This is true with a pastor, an interpreter, a scholar, whoever. It doesn't really matter, okay? Anyone, anytime when someone asserts something, that doesn't make it true, and it doesn't also mean you have to accept it as true, okay? I'm having to learn that myself, is you've got to defend. If you say something, you've got to defend it as to why and how you accomplished the actual verdict that you're positing. So with that being said, I'm going to do my best to hopefully steelman and state the actual claim. Now, it's a 4-minute video. This is my summary of what I believe Jason is saying. Okay. put it in the chat if you think I got it right or if I'm missing something, okay? Here is the claim. First of all, Jason is claiming that the little horn is said to be broken without hand in Daniel 8:25. ADL then argues that this denotes divine eschatological destruction and that it is the stone in Daniel 2 that destroys the statue. So I want you to notice that he connects, because of the language of broken without hand, his claim is that that connects it back to Daniel 2. The second half of his claim, whether it was officially stated or not, okay, in this clip, is that since Antiochus IV of Epiphanes died naturally or through some sort of ordinary cause, well, he wasn't broken without, again, this was not a supernatural invention or intervention in some way, shape, or form. This points all the way back to the fourth beast, as was stated. And that has to be, based on his conclusion, it must be instead Rome. It cannot be Antiochus. Now, I hope that I did justice to the claim. What we're going to do today, as we've been doing, okay, is I want to work through the text. I want to make sure that we're aware of, I'm going to bring up some philology. I'm going to bring up some textual context. I'm going to talk about ancient historiography. I'm going to bring it into context and make sure that the claim that it ties back to chapter 2, as well as what the Hebrew says, not just in Hebrews, but also in other places where this language is used. Really what is going on in the text, okay? So let's jump back to the actual text itself. We're going to go to Daniel 8:24, and we're going to see what's going on in the text. Now, I'm going to read 24 and 25. This is out of the NRSV. It really doesn't matter to me per se which one that you use. I always use this one because it's tied to, particularly it's tied to my interlinear, which you'll see at the bottom, and it also automatically has some of the books that Protestants don't accept as canonical in it. We're going to go to Maccabees in just a second, and so that's helpful for this particular resource. He shall grow strong in power. Speaking of he, this is the little horn, okay? Shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does. He shall destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. By his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall be great. Without warning, he shall destroy many, and shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes. Now, I'm going to pause for a second before I finish this out. In a post that was recently put on ADL's channel, the claim from ADL is that this has to be Jesus. I'm not going to talk much today about that. I will deal with it. What I will tell you is that is an anachronism. It makes no sense to have Jesus, who is not incarnate, be who Daniel is speaking about. That would make no sense, okay? Now, you could argue that maybe that is the angel of Yahweh or somehow connected. I haven't heard. Maybe they're connecting it to Michael, the archangel, which is somehow connected to this. But saying that this is Jesus as just a duh, I don't know, why don't you see it, would make no sense. The Messiah hasn't even shown up. They don't know who Jesus is. That makes absolutely no sense in the context. Now, I'll work through that at a later video, okay, when the time comes. Verse 25 ends but he shall be broken, and not by human hands. Now, I have said this before. I'm going to go through some of this on the bottom again, so you all understand what's going on, okay? Notice the numbers here, 26, 27, 28, 29. Notice this is the beginning of the next verse. So in order here, you've got you got the B, and then this epes yod. Now, I want you to notice in the center here, there's a dot underneath this. The reason for the dot is because there actually isn't an original language word that's translated that. That's part of, it's kind of added. It really should just be hands, okay? Or as you'll see in just a second, really the word, this yod word, it actually doesn't mean physical hands. It actually has more of a, it's a phrase that deals with power or agency. Obviously, yes, it can be hands, but you're under someone's hands, which means you're under their power. Okay. It's not with human hands, it's power. So without going into the great detail of the actual text, I do want to point out that this phrase that we're going to analyze right here, not by human hands, is an idiom. It's idiomatic. And this isn't Mike Colburn. This is, again, there are other scholars that are much better at paying attention to the language. You would know this if you understood the original language. You would know, just like if I said, if I said something like, it's raining cats and dogs, you know that it's not actual cats and dogs. A similar way of seeing this from an idiomatic standpoint is to look at something like this. Okay, I'm going to go to another example, and then I'm going to show you how this pans out. You have heard Adventists use the phrase finger of God as a way of saying that the Ten Commandments are, they're inscribed by his finger. This is an idiom, and it does not mean the physical finger of God. That's not what's going on. In fact, if it did, then basically in Luke 11, verse 20, you would have Jesus going around carrying the literal finger of God, casting out demons like a pointer, okay? That's not what it means. That's not what's going on. If you don't understand idioms in the original language, you will conflate this with that concept, as the Adventists do in their understanding of the fact that the Ten Commandments were written with the finger of God, okay? Now, the same is true when we go back here and we look at not by human hands, okay? Idioms, and this is really important. What does it mean for something to be without human hands? Now, you could argue it being literal, okay? If it's literal, it means someone that has no hands, like their hands are cut off. That makes no sense. Now, I'm pushing this point to make sure that everyone understands that you've got to know when things are idiomatic. You've got to know when things point to certain things in the text. And the only way you do that is by paying attention to the original language. It just doesn't pan out if all you're doing is paying attention to the English translation, whether it be King James or whether it be any other, version of the Bible. So what we got to understand is idioms aren't always easy to pick up on. Because, and part of the reason they're not easy to pick up on is because we are crossing from one language to another, from one culture to another, from one time of Earth's history to another. One of my professors that I'm currently studying under likes to say, listen, every time that you open up the Bible, open up the Word of God, you need to check your passport, because you are not in the U.S. You are not really supposed to be thinking about this through English eyes, through Western eyes, you've got to check your passport, not only go back in time, different language, different culture, all of that, okay? Otherwise, you will run into problems. Now, what is important to understand is that idioms, especially this one here, not by human hands, okay? Or it might be in your translation, it might say broken without hand. It might be the way it shows up. This is an expression that points to agency that isn't human. I saw some of you make a comment earlier. It was something about, power or agency. Yes, that's what the idiom is supposed to convey. Okay, it's not necessarily physical hands. Okay, in other words, the little horn's demise, whoever this little horn is, the little horn's demise will be by divine direction. Now, that's going to be important. It's going to be really important when we get to how and what happened actually with Antiochus versus this argument that it's Rome, okay? Now, one other thing I do want to just make a comment. Some of you may not have access to original language. The best thing that you can do is just open up the Bible and grab a couple of other texts and pay attention to how these phrases at the end of the text, okay? Just notice how different they are. Here we have, but he shall be broken and not by human hands, but not by human hands. That's pretty much similar. Over here in the NASB, we have, but he will be broken without human agency. Okay, that's again, some of you said agency, some said power. Yes, that's what's going on in the text. You don't have to be an expert in the biblical language to at least be perceptive to understand, hey, there's some differences going on in the text that we need to be aware of, okay? Okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to compare this idea, this without human hands. How does that show up in other passages? How does the idiom? Now, when I say idiom, idioms aren't always going to show up as the same exact lexical words, okay? Because Hebrew has semantic domains. And so sometimes a word will be in the domain, but it's not going to show up as the exact manuscript phrase inside of the text. And so the ones I'm going to take you to is I'm going to go to Job. We're going to go to Job 20. Sorry, Job, not Jonah. Job 34, verse 20. Now, I want you to pay attention to what the text, again, we don't have time. Ideally, we'd read the whole chapter. We would have read the whole book, and then we can kind of keep it in context of what's going on. But I want you to pay attention to the idiom that's going on here. In the moment they die, at midnight, the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by no human hand. Okay? So understand that means something. Okay? That means something in the text. So here we have without hand. It simply denotes without human agency. Now, this is not a conversation about the afterlife, but that fits into, or should at least be, one of the things that you understand, because this actually is talking about when someone dies. So how does Job understand what's going on? Again, that's a whole nother conversation. I've done hours of discussion on the afterlife. So this is no army that does this, or some sort of executioner that brings their end. That's not what's going on. Rather, in the text, the calamity that arises, it arises by divine will or natural cause attributed to God. That's what's going on. Let's look at another one. Lamentations 4:6. For the chastisement of my people has been greater than the punishment of Sodom. So, greater than the punishment of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment, though no hand was laid on it. Okay? Though wrought with no hand is another way some of the texts say. So again, the phrase here signals, if you understand the idiomatic language, it signals divine causality, not visible supernatural intervention. That's not what's going on, okay? It's divine causality. So in the biblical idiom, broken without hand, it does not require some sort of spectacular theophany. When I say theophany, it's where like God shows up, okay? It doesn't require that's not necessary. It doesn't necessitate that. It only means that God, not man, ultimately determines the fall. Okay? It's a standard theological attribution in the Hebrew language. I just want to make sure that we understand the idiomatic language that's being used in the text. Now, one other thing I want to pay close attention to is if you look at all the places in the text where the Hebrew word hand, the word hand, if you go back to Daniel 8:25, which is the text that we're looking at, this word hand, it shows up in two places here. It's the word yod, okay? Yod. Now this down here, you're going to see it show up a little bit differently. I want you to pay attention to the actual scribal marks of what it looks like for yod, okay? Now, when we look at the phrase here, this is looking at, this isn't looking at just that scribal note. It's looking at a larger semantic domain for this particular word. And you're going to see it in the midst of other letters. You see it right there in the middle, okay? That's yod, okay? And you're going to notice that it shows up differently. You will tell in the context of the verses if it's literal hands, like, so the men seized him, okay? That's not idiomatic. It's very clear, okay? Versus, okay, caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. Now, was that could be physically, maybe it isn't, okay? You're going to notice that it gets translated, here's in Joseph's care. Now, that doesn't mean it, yes, it's in his hands, but it's in his care. So I want you to understand, even as we get through, I'm going to scroll through some of these. I want to get to a few that will kind of make sense. Into his hand. When you get to, let's get to some other texts. I want you to notice it's very, very clear. Now, Isaiah 53:11. He shall see his offspring and shall prolong his days. Through him, the will of the Lord shall prosper. This is yod right in the middle. We know that doesn't mean the physical hands, okay? So I'm showing you this because I want you to understand how complicated the Hebrew language can be. Don't just assume that it is what you think the English word says, that it's being translated properly across cultural barriers, across the language spectrum, across time period, across all the things that we have to get through when we deal with the language. Don't assume that it's just, oh, it's just this, okay? So what we looked at was where the Hebrew word for hand, yod, is in connection with power. Now, it appears, you can very clearly see that the context, I hope that you can see anyways, that the context of yod determines if it's literal hands or something else. Now, I'm going to show you one last thing. This is the same search. Notice that when we get into Daniel, what happens? Okay. Notice Esther here, golden scepter that was in his hand. There's yod right there in the center. Notice that as we jump into Daniel, which, by the way, whole nother dialogue, but this is not just Hebrew, but sometimes it's Aramaic, and that's a whole nother conversation. But when we jump into Daniel and we see these marks for yod, what does it say? Given into his power. Oh, Why? Because we know what's going on in the context of the verse. Okay? Same with Daniel 8. We get to Daniel 8. I want you to notice something down here. You've got, this one is not populated in our targeted verse, Daniel 8:25. But notice that the first hand is in our search. This is the reason why we understand that this is idiomatic. It does not mean physical hand. I know I'm taking a large amount of time to make this point, but it goes to the reason why I'm refuting this part of the claim. Okay, when he goes back and connects to Daniel 2 and see this, that, whatever. Okay, so just understand that it's idiomatic. It's idiomatic. Okay, context, I've said this before, context drives the understanding of the words, of what's going on. And it's important that we understand what the author intended it to mean rather than what you or I want it to mean, even if we want it really bad. Okay. All right, let's go back. Okay, now let's notice how Jason made the argument. He kind of talked about now who did it without hands, and then what did he do? He just asked a question, no support. He asked a question. He claimed it to be Rome and then went back to Daniel 2. Now, I want you to pay attention that that is assuming something. First of all, the assumption is that the dream in Daniel 2 is paralleled with Daniel 8. That's the assumption. Now, I'm not going to argue in this video of whether or not it is or isn't, but understand that when you make a claim and you jump to conclusions that you haven't proved, that makes it difficult. Okay. I don't buy it. Okay. Why are you claiming? This would be a question for Jason. What gives you the textual reason to claim that this interaction with Nebuchadnezzar is directly tied to Daniel 8? And if it is, you've got to prove it. Okay. Now, in Daniel 2, the stone, let's go down to 34. Okay, this is where he got in the text. Okay, there's the hand. It's highlighted because, see, it's the same. It's yod, but it shows up differently because, as you hopefully can already identify, there's the yod, but it's connected with another kind of Hebrew marker. Okay. Now, 34 and 35. As you looked on, a stone was cut out, not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken in pieces. Now, Daniel 2, okay, Daniel chapter 2, the stone cut not by hands indeed does represent God's kingdom, okay? That can be a whole nother video to defend that. I don't think that we would disagree. I don't think that Jason or anyone at Edwin or anyone at ADL would disagree that the stone is the ushering in of God's kingdom. The disagreement would come when and how and what that looks like. Okay. Yes, it's bringing in some sort of eschatological rupture in history, but how you determine or understand this matter is a matter of your viewpoint, and it does matter how you interpret the text. So the question is, here's my question with this. Does the stone come at Jesus' first coming, or does it come at his second coming? You would have to argue and defend which one you'd believe to be more valid. Okay. Again, I'm not going to say what is or isn't there, but just understand that the assumption here is that Jason assumed one thing, that Daniel 8 is connected to Daniel 2. That was the assumption. And then that the stone has to be something that's way in the future. Whether it's, and my understanding is that if it's Rome, then it's post Christ. Okay. Now they might argue, no, that was at Christ's first coming. Most of the time I've heard that it's the second coming, But I've heard both ways, and I don't know that they really know which way is the best way to argue that, okay? I have a different opinion entirely of the Adventist framework. Now, Daniel frequently uses motifs. Daniel frequently uses motifs across the visions with oftentimes adapted meanings. Okay, in Daniel 8, if we go back to Daniel 8, the idiom that we're paying attention to, it serves not as an echo of the stone episode Cosmic Judgment back in 2, but as a theological refrain contrasting divine sovereignty. Now, what do you mean? Well, effectively, what I mean is that Daniel chapter 8 is effectively saying, whoever this little, let's go to Daniel 8. Okay, let's go to Daniel 8. The text is saying, okay, and you've got to put all the stuff that we've been paying attention to. Remember, we talked about ego. We talked about him, kind of standing up against God. It was a theological kind of vertical engagement. He's vertically engaged, not necessarily horizontal. Although yes, the kings as they pushed did have some horizontal push. That's not really what's happening in the text as far as the theological refrain that's happening. So effectively, what it says here, by his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall be great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes. Okay? You'd have to argue, how does Rome rise up against the Prince of Princes? You'd have to argue, how does that even work? But he shall be broken, and not by human hands. Now, he shall be broken, but not by his own power. Not by his own power, nor by his foes' prowess. His downfall, what the text is saying, is his downfall. This individual's downfall, by the way, that's really important. This individual's downfall, you've got to argue if it means Rome or the papacy. The papacy encompasses multiple people, okay, which is another thing that doesn't fit the narrative, okay? His downfall lies in divine appointment. This is the same exact thematic structure that appears repeatedly. I want you to look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 26. Then the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and totally destroyed. This is that motif, okay? It's going to be taken from him. Who's taking it? This is divine judgment. Divine judgment that's happening. You can later see in the narrative, chapter 11, okay? Chapter 11, verse 45. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with no one to help him. Again, each of these instances in the narrative, these are motifs that you see in the narrative. Each of these instances, the tyrants, whoever they are, their end is inevitable. Why? Because of divine decree. It's not necessary to infuse some sort of miraculous, like, oh, this is going to be, it has to be some crazy miraculous thing that occurs, or an appearance, or something, something crazy, because you tie it back to chapter 2 with the rock, and it has to be some like big major thing. That's not what's going on in the narrative, okay? So my response here would be the broken without hand. It fits the Danielic pattern without extending it into an end time Adventist post 1844 eschatology, whatever, wherever the Adventist lands, okay, wherever they think this rock is, or this little horn, this is Rome, the papacy. That's the big challenge. If it's Rome and then it moves into the papacy, well, now the papacy is still here. It's not destroyed. So This is post 1844 if you follow the logic and the argument of what's going on in the Adventist position. Now, this is something that I would argue the author of Daniel or the recipients of the writings of the author of Daniel, they would have no clue how to understand something that's like, oh, this is going to happen thousands of years later. Thousands. There's no comfort. What you're going through in the present time, that's not really what's happening. In fact, your actual, everything that's going to actually pan out as to your advantage is going to happen it's going to happen post 2025 because it hasn't happened yet. Okay, because the papal power is still apparently in play. So none of the Jewish people could ever and never did understand, basically, is what the Adventist position is saying. None of them understood. None of them understood what Daniel was talking about in these visions, at least with regards to the little horn. How could they? Because, it wasn't Antiochus, so they got that wrong, and they didn't really know that it had some sort of play on Rome and the papal power. So that is an anachronism, meaning something that is read into the text that they would have absolutely no clue or ability to comprehend. An anachronism, okay? Now, I told you that we were going to get into Maccabees, so I want to just talk real quick about the reception, the historical correspondence of Antiochus IV. And the reason why this is important is because it's going to play into the way Antiochus's death was received, how it was decreed. So I want to go to 1 Maccabees 6 and 8 to 16, actually. I'm not going to read all of it, but if you want to read 1 Maccabees 6 verses 8 through 16, when you get to verse 13, notice what is said, okay? I know that it is because of this that these misfortunes have come upon me. Here I am, perishing a bitter disappointment in a strange land. This is the reception of the way in which they viewed Antiochus's death. Let's fast forward to 2 Maccabees 9:5. And I'll read this entire one here. This is 9:5 to 12. Okay. But the all-seeing Lord, the God of Israel, struck him, speaking of Antiochus, struck him with an incurable and invisible blow. As soon as he stopped speaking, he was seized with a pain in his bowels for which there was no relief, and with sharp internal tortures. And that very justly. For he had tortured the bowels of others with many and strange afflictions. Yet he did not in any way stop his insolence, but was even more filled with, notice, arrogance, okay? Breathing fire in his rage against the Jews. Now, this is previously you heard in other texts where it talks about Antiochus actually going against the covenant people of God. This is the reception of it, okay? Giving orders to drive even faster. And so it came about that he fell out of his chariot as it was rushing along, and the fall was so hard as to torture every limb of his body. Thus, he, who only a little while before had thought in his superhuman arrogance that he could command the waves of the sea and had imagined that he could weigh the high mountains in a balance, was brought down to earth and carried to a litter, making the power of God manifest to all. And so the ungodly man's body swarmed with worms, and while he was still living in anguish and pain, his flesh rotted away, and because of the stench, the whole army felt revulsion at his decay. Because of his intolerable stench, no one was able to carry the man who a little while before had thought that he could touch the stars of heaven. This is the arrogance that you see is prophesied in Daniel. Then it was that, broken in spirit, he began to lose much of his arrogance and to come to his senses under the scourge of God. For he was tortured with pain every moment. And when he could not endure his own stench, he uttered these words, "It is right to be subject to God. Mortals should not think that they are equal to God." That's the reception. Okay, that is Antiochus's mysterious internal disease by the hand of God. Worms consumed him, his flesh rots, and he confesses at the end his arrogance. Okay, it is right to be subject to God. So this, now here's what's interesting. Okay, you can kind of look, there are some discrepancies on exactly what happened with Antiochus's death. But Antiochus died. He died suddenly. 164, a few months after the rededication of the temple, somewhere around December 165 or thereabouts, okay, the temple got actually rededicated. And then he dies. Apparently some sort of, it was either a mental disorder, it was some sort of divine something, okay? Some even suggest that they call it a divine stroke. This is by the hand of God, okay? Not killed by human hands, but killed by agency, by divine agency. So I want you to understand that the contemporary Jewish viewpoint, Antiochus was indeed broken without hand. And the author of Daniel, whether he wrote Daniel with a theological foresight or with a hindsight, that's another video later on, okay? Could easily have used the idiom to encapsulate precisely this divine retribution. Okay, now I said foresight, hindsight, because I will be creating, hopefully in the near future, a video with regards to authorship and dating Daniel, because that does matter with regards to how you understand this. Now, I will say this. I have yet to hear, and maybe I haven't just found it yet, I have yet to hear ADL in their argument of Antiochus as not being the little horn, show their cards as to the dating and why they believe Daniel is dated a specific way. That is something that must be handled in regards to being supportive of your stance or not, okay? Okay, a couple of other things that I just want to point out. I want to pay attention to some literary, we do this every time, literary and theological parallels in the text. If we go to Isaiah 31, 7 to 8. Isaiah 31, 7 and 8. For on that day, all of you shall throw away your idols of silver and idols of gold, which your hands, now it's yod, it's in the same semantic domain. You'll see a few other items here in the word. That's why it shows up a tad bit differently, okay? Which your hands have sinfully made for you. Notice what happens in the next verse. Then the Assyrians shall fall by a sword not of mortals, and a sword not of humans shall devour them. He shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be put to forced labor. This is the fall of the Assyrian Empire. It's a historical event. We know that this happened, but it is framed in almost an identical idiom. Divine, yet historically natural. That makes sense, okay? And it follows the textual and theological parallels of other prophets. Daniel's considered a prophet. Isaiah is considered a prophet. Let's go to another prophet, famous. These are the major prophets, okay? Ezekiel 28. I don't know why. Let's see, I said Isaiah. Ezekiel 28, verses 18 and 19. Now, this is a difficult passage. This is the proud king of Tyre. That's a whole nother video. I would love to do a video on Tyre, Tyre. By the multitude of your iniquities in the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. So I brought out fire from within you. It consumed you, and it turned you to ash on the earth in the sight of all who saw you. All who know you among the peoples are appalled at you. You have come to a dreadful end and shall be no more forever. This is a proud king. It's the king of Tyre. He's destroyed. How is he destroyed? He's destroyed by divine fire. It's a metaphor for hubris that's meeting downfall. Okay. Now, it would probably be odd for you to think that literally he had fire come from inside of him and he just like blew up and incinerated. That would be a literal rendering without understanding that the text is idiomatic. Really important that you understand the language. Daniel 8, very clearly, okay, continues this prophetic tradition. This is normal inside the prophets. Idiomatic, the downfall of, okay, he shall be broken without hand. What is that equivalent to? This proud king is going to fall with some sort of divine retribution. It's not because of human strength. It's going to be because of divine judgment. Now, we can tell, we have historical documentation of Antiochus's actual death. It's accompanied by humiliation and acknowledgement of divine justice. And this is why it fits perfectly. It perfectly enacts that principle that Daniel is trying to communicate in the idiomatic language. Now, if you're going to follow the Adventist interpretation through, similar to what Jason said and ADL is positing, how, like, speaking of the Adventist understanding itself, how would Rome, this is, again, there's no consistency in the argument. How would Rome and the papal power fit into this sort of idiomatic understanding? Like, this hasn't happened. This isn't like you would have to believe that it still hasn't happened, which causes a problem with Jason's connection back to Daniel 2 with the stone. That's just not good exegesis of the text. Okay. Now, I want to talk about the contextual fit. Let's go back to Daniel 8, 24 and 25. Mine says, let's go to 25 here. By his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. Without warning, he shall destroy many and shall even rise up against the prince of princes. But he shall be broken and not by human hands. I want you to notice that the verse is juxtaposed the human cunning at the top. Okay. You've got cunning and it's juxtaposed, meaning it's positioned against divine intervention and judgment. Do you see it in the text? So Daniel is, in this vision, Daniel is saying that whoever the little horn is going to have this arrogance, this human cunning and deception is juxtaposed against divine judgment. This is a common motif in the Old Testament. This contrast itself, it demands, in my opinion, okay, if you understand the language, it demands that this broken without hand, it expresses poetic justice. The right-hand persecutor meets a downfall beyond human connection. Like this is a theological symmetry that to me strengthens. In fact, this is one of the larger arguments that would be in support of. It's not really in contrast to. It's in support of the Antiochene reading. He exalts himself beyond measure very clearly. Okay, he's like, I mean, historically documented in the narrative of the text. And then what does he do? He perishes by, in the Maccabean, reception of it, by an invisible hand of God. How would you argue against that? Again, I think that the evidence supports the Antiochus connection here. Now, we've talked about a couple of. I'm going to look at one more thing, and then we're getting close to closing it down. Okay. There is intertextual resonance in the Maccabean literature. If we go back to Maccabees 9:5, verses 5 to 9, it serves almost, if you read this, 5 to 9. And it almost serves as a midrash on Daniel 8:25. Midrash is it's like an interpretation of, or a way of understanding. Okay. So what's happening? Well, Antiochus would by no means cease from his bragging. That matches. Okay. If you read the text in here, that matches the magnified himself to the Prince of Princes. Then you have the Lord Almighty smote him with an incurable pain. You remember that in the text when we read, like, superhuman arrogance right here? But then you have the bowels. You'll notice that he talked about, reading it in the text right here, all of this arrogance that comes through right here, magnified himself. And then you get the incurable pain in the bowel, invisible torment. It matches broken without hands. It's very, very, very nice parallel in the literature. Then you have he that a little bit before thought he could reach the stars of heaven. Notice down here, because of this, before had thought that he could touch the stars of heaven. Again, that's a parallel. It's almost like a midrash. The chronicler is consciously echoing. When I say chronicler, whoever wrote Maccabees, okay, the chronicler is consciously echoing Daniel's prophecies. He's demonstrating the contemporary understanding that broken without hands refers exactly to the Antiochus God-struck death. By divine retribution, Antiochus comes down because of something from God. Now, one other element of this, and we're getting really, really close, okay, to the end of today's conversation. But one other element is this divine retribution that follows justice. And in apocalyptic theology, not all of Daniel is apocalyptic, okay? But in apocalyptic theology, this idea of breaking of arrogance, or arrogant empires, it signifies, or it should signify to the reader, that Yahweh's vindication is being seen, that Yahweh's vindication of his holiness is happening through the events. This is their theology. So Antiochus's demise, it really surprisingly fulfills. This is one of those things where it's like, man, you really got to push the envelope to conclude. You've got to find some sort of reason not to want it to be that particular understanding, because Antiochus's demise, it really does fulfill this typology. He rose against the Prince of Princes. He did. Okay. He profaned the temple of Yahweh. Historically accurate. We know that to be the case. And then he perishes without hand. There's a divine sentence reflecting Deuteronomy 32:35, where it says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And even to later Jews, okay, this particular death, Antiochus's death, was nothing less than a visible sign to them that God intervenes in history. Even if not, ultimate end time, cosmic end time in nature, he intervenes in the midst of where God's people are at in history. So I really feel like there's some significant evidence here to support the Antiochus understanding, and I think it would be erroneous to connect Daniel 8 to Daniel 2. I think that again, I'd love to hear Jason's textual reason for that. I didn't get anything from him. It just was an assumption. So a couple things just to kind of summarize everything that we've talked about so far, just to put it in concise, okay? Here's the claim that one of the claims that's made is that without hands means some sort of miraculous cosmic destruction. As we already pointed out, it's an idiom. It denotes divine rather than human agency. That's what's going on. This is common. It's a part of prophetic literature. It's very ordinary. This is common language. The second claim, Antiochus' death was natural. No, that's not the case. That's not the way the history books claim it to be, okay? Jewish sources, anyways, explicitly describe it as divine punishment. Now, one might argue, I have heard some Adventists make this claim, well, why are you believing what Jews believe to be true? I mean, they didn't even believe in the Messiah. That's a really horrible argument, because you're going to basically say that none of the Hebrew scriptures are valid then, because they're Hebrew. So that would be a horrible conclusion. I don't know if that's the way that ADL would go or not. But I have yet to hear, that kind of argument as to why do the Jewish sources recognize this to be the case. It seems to be pretty logical. The third main claim is that Daniel's 2 imagery requires some sort of eschatological consistency, and meaning Daniel 2 has to be tied, because it's the stone without hands. It has to be tied to Daniel 8. And here's the reality. Shared language does not equal shared referent. Just because there is shared language, it does not mean it's a shared reference or a referent. Daniel is going to adapt motifs fluidly to theological ends. Like don't make that major exegetical fallacy to think that, just because this has shared language, that now the referent is the same. That's not the case, okay? If it is, you got to prove it. And he did not prove that. The fourth thing is that, he claimed that therefore Antiochus doesn't fit. Well, I disagree. I think we've provided enough evidence in this one claim, along with the previous 3 videos, and we're just getting started, friends. We got 20 of them to go. So another 16. In fact, Antiochus, in this instance, Antiochus fits the best. He's a blasphemous monarch, destroyed providentially, broken without hand, exactly as Daniel predicted. So here are my kind of final thoughts. The phrase in Daniel 8:25. He shall be broken without hands. Maybe in the King James Bible, you'll see it in this way, okay? But he shall be broken without hand. This is succinct Hebrew. This is a succinct Hebrew idiom for divine caused downfall. It's not some sort of supernatural, like stone is going to blow everyone up and the kingdom of God is going to, it's not Armageddon language. That's not what's going on in the text. Okay. That there's no, it's a Hebrew idiom that means divine caused downfall. When when we read within Daniel's narrative sequence and the historical reports of Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, his incredibly divine-oriented death, the text aligns seamlessly. Yes, Scotty, I believe that you are accurate. He fits the model perfectly. Now, we're just getting started. We have additional episodes to go down, other reasons why I think it is. But he fits philologically, again, contextually, okay? In contrast, human arrogance with divine retribution. He fits historically. He matches the Maccabean portrayal of Antiochus struck by God. He fits theologically. This whole, he underscores that God, not man, vindicates his holiness. That whole concept of what's going on in the text, he fits. Therefore, Antiochus is far from being disqualified. There is yet to be any solid evidence that would convince me that, especially if you use this broken without hand. He spent 4 minutes on this in his video, of a 38-minute video. So it's a significant amount of time for his fourth claim. But in my opinion, the broken without hand argument actually fights against him. It's probably one of the strongest textual confirmations of his identity as Daniel's little horn. All right, friends, we were just over an hour. I was able to get at least a few minutes less than the previous one. I have so appreciated you being here. I appreciated the dialogue in the text as we go through some of this. By the way, I want to encourage you, if you're here watching, Adventist, non-Adventist, former Adventist, soon to be former Adventist, or new Adventist, whatever you are, whoever you are, we would love to have you join the Discord channel. Scan the code. You're welcome to join. If you are an Adventist that loves to debate, just can't wait to argue the ins and outs of it, we've got a channel specifically dedicated for just that. And you can wrestle with those that like to do that back and forth. And we hope that it will edify the body of Christ and bring honor and glory to him. So thank you guys for being here. Appreciate you tons. Hope to see you on the next one. And keep it real. Study the Word of God. We'll see you next time.